Welcome to Casual Watch Talk, the podcast from the Casual Watch Reviewer YouTube channel. Join us as we talk everything watches, from watch collecting, the latest horology news and interviews. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe on your favourite podcast app. Let's dive into the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 38 of Casual Watch Talk. You're joined by Sam and Kris. How have you been this week, Kris?
Pretty good, hanging in there. 38, getting up there. Nice.
I know, we're nearly next milestone, which is 40, which I'll also be personally hitting in November.
All right,
yeah,
40 and 40.
I didn't expect my leading up to my 40th year to be quite the interesting year, but...
And by interesting, you meant a dumpster fire on
It's incredible to think that the millennium was 20 years ago. That just freaks me out every time I think about that. When everyone was like the millennium bug. And I think I had there's some watches, isn't there, that only went up to 99. I remember I had an Apple Newton that did it, and then you had to get it reflashed or whatever.
Yeah. Lots of the older Casios, like they don't, like, you can't. You can set it to 20, but it's, Wednesday and not whatever 1920.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of that, and they're like, they just didn't. I mean, even today, like there's it surprises me, the stuff that they just don't think like, oh, it'll have, this will be around for 20 years, and you're like, oh no, we're still using it.
Oh, definitely. Well, we've got a pretty light news week this week, but I think we're going to make up for it with a really interesting main topic. And this is something that I've been interested in covering on the podcast for a long time. And that is an introduction to watch modding, because you've done quite a lot now, haven't you, Kris? I think you've been teaching yourself for, the last couple of years? Or
Yeah, I'd say that, yeah.
So we'll go into introduction to watch modding, because this is pertinent to that Walbrook that I just bought that we were changing the movement in, which I suppose that sounds quite scary and it certainly to me sounds quite scary as a watch collector, that you're ripping the heart of a watch out.
Right. Yeah. And going into it, like, heart surgery. Exactly. There's stuff to watch out for, which we'll definitely talk about.
Yeah, I'm really interested for that one. Well, let's kick it off, as always, with watch obsession. So what's your watch obsession been this week, Kris?
I think watch obsession has been watch spotting on a couple of the new sci-fi shows that I've been watching.
Oh, yeah.
On various streaming channels. And I posted on a forum where no one had figured out there's a particular watch in a way.
I've been watching that on Netflix. This is the new show where they go to Mars.
It's a little more of the personal drama than it is the, like, space sci-fi. So I watched that, and I watched For All Mankind. I was catching up with For All Mankind, which is on Apple streaming.
Yeah.
And the difference is like night and day as far as like how the effects are done and the science fiction. I mean, it's like they nailed with For All Mankind. They absolutely nailed the Apollo era, their technology, how like the landers and the different parts and pieces and how that all works. Whereas I think Away, the set is a little, it's a little sci-fi kind of, in the future we will have some miracle technology, but it looks like a bunch of, like, stainless steel pipes and wires that someone has sort of put together.
It's that For All Mankind, if anybody's not seen it, it's got a very interesting premise, hasn't it? Where it's almost rewriting history, but presenting it as if it was a document, a sort of docudrama on it.
Yeah, alternate reality. So what would happen if the Russians made it to the moon before us? Yeah, in the space race, and very historically accurate to start with, and then of course they that timeline peels away. But they deal with von Braun and sort of the stuff that was going on in the background in the 60s, racial inequality and et cetera, and as well as female inequality. And they touch on all that, and it's pretty fascinating.
So I'm guessing I watched the first couple of episodes away, so clearly there was Speedmasters in there and Speedmasters on NATO's.
Yeah. So the one of the main characters, was it Matt, has he's got his Speedmaster on a NATO. And it was funny. And if you watch them back to back, Sam, I think the two production companies are like simultaneously keeping Omega in business with this. There has to be, $32,000 worth of Speedmasters in just these two, just these two space productions. I mean, because like there has to be. I saw at least 5-10 of them in For All Mankind.
It's weird because you can't think of another watch. I can't think of another watch that would have to be there. When you make something about space or a historical documentary, you have to have a Speedmaster in it.
Right.
And
right.
Isn't that weird? Can you think of another watch where, I mean, of course you've got watches where you would expect a Rolex to be there, like Scarface and Sopranos and things like that, where you're like, well, of course they would wear a Rolex, but the Rolex, it doesn't have to be there. It's not historically significant, whereas the Omega Speedmaster, if you're making anything to do with space or historical space, I mean, the Speedmaster has to be there.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't started watching it yet, but the documentary on the Challenger disaster, which is, but if they are doing anything with the space shuttle, it's going to be the X-33. I mean, Mike Massimino, as we've talked about, he wears that watch every day. That's his, space everyday watch. Yeah. And that watch has been in orbit, more times than I'll ever be. And so, you're right. I think maybe like some of the like a vintage racing that would have to have some like Tag Heuer stuff in it.
Or like a Paul Newman life documentary if they did like a autobiography drama.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I'd have to go back. I haven't watched Ford versus Ferrari yet. I don't know why. I haven't watched that. It's been on my watch list for too long, and I'm sure that's going to be one of those where there'll be a couple of Monacos that I'll certainly are in there. But no, you're right. I can't think of any other that sort of demands that has to be that one watch is sort of associated with so well. So I mean, good for Omega Marketing taking that back to Away. So I paused and figured out in a couple of shots, Rom, who's played by Ray Pentaki, if I pronounce that correctly. He's definitely wearing this Citizen Flieger. It's a Citizen Flieger chronograph.
Okay.
And it's got the big. It's a pretty big watch. And it's a modern eco drive with the big triangle at the top. I went so far as to post over on Watch You Seek because I'm very this tickles my fancy as far as spotting. And it seems like the Russian cosmonaut in the show is wearing a Poljot. Poljot.
Yeah. Because I couldn't notice that. I don't think that must come in later episodes because I was watch spotting as well on that and I couldn't see it straight away.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought I was searching for at first I was like, I thought maybe it was modern. So I was searching for like a champagne dial Fortis is kind of what I just took a stab at it.
Yeah.
And then when I saw that two of the characters were wearing Citizen, I did that search and I couldn't find anything that looked like it. But someone has done a pretty good close-up shot of it and figured out it was a Poljot chronograph 3133. And interesting, he wears two watches. I don't know what the second watch is. It's sort of like a blacked out.
That's an iconic part of it, isn't it? Where he's got the two watches on there, similar to how the astronauts used to wear the G-Shock and then the Speedmaster.
Yeah, and even now you'll see there's a astronaut on the ISS right now that wears his Speedmaster, and then they have like a heartbeat temperature sensor monitor that kind of looks like the original like basic Timex and it might even be made by them, that just that he wears two watches. It has the time on it, but he doesn't. He has it face down instead of face up.
Yeah.
So that they both of them fit easier on the wrist, kind of thing. But yeah, also iconic, like wearing two wristwatches in space. It's
interesting that, because I think I certainly did an upload on the channel around it, that Timex has got a very long and storied history with US space travel. I mean, a Timex watch was one of the 5 or so that NASA have authorized that collaboration with that they did with the Microsoft watch. Arguably one of the first smartwatches that was ever made. The Timex data link.
Yeah. So it was definitely my obsession was checking out all of the wristwatches that were popping up on these two shows, and I'm sure we'll continue.
It's interesting, the watch choice, in a way, isn't it? Because I still haven't watched enough of it to work out what the timeline is. I can't tell whether it's 20 years in the future or whether it's an alternative present day.
I think that was a good choice for them. Because I think that too many sci-fi, they sort of like they plant a flag in a particular year or time, and they're like 2030 is going to be amazing, and it's like, I'm close enough to 2030 to know it's not going to be that amazing. and so I almost like it when they don't, because it's like, because then they don't have to really explain, and they don't have to go into the crazy, like if they show a shot of like a house, and like, oh, the cars that they have from the future, this sort of thing. So it's like, it goes, anytime they say like, oh, okay, we have to plan it far in the future, then what happens is then like we have to like Ridley Scott like your front yard and like have all sorts of stuff like your flying space car or whatever that you have, and it gets so it's almost better to just not say what year it is and just be like, listen, we're going to Mars, we look like a team.
It's funny you say about the way, and guys, you'll have to watch it. It's on Netflix, but it's funny what you say about the way, because there's the daughter in it. This isn't a spoiler, but they've got a daughter. The wife is the one that's going to Mars. And the daughter's fashion, I was joking with my wife, I was saying they've picked a style for her of a fashion that has never been in fashion ever. Right. It's not like a 90s throwback or anything. She's that poorly dressed that it's just never, ever been in fashion.
Right.
Anyway, she's wearing sometimes like a military sort of shirt with like really huge jeans on, sort of 90s. But not quite.
And also the music in it. The music in it is an older generation, I would say, like a boomer generation music. That it's fine, but it sort of it sort of made me think kind of the same thing. Like, where is this from? Like, what time is this set in? Where is this from? Because of the, like, you wouldn't have like, a rock song from the 1970s in a drama about the 90s, that sort of thing. Yeah. So.
Well, I've been doing a bit of watch spotting as well. We've just finished off, and I don't know how we did it. I think we've been watching it every day, but the new series of MacGyver, which I think has been out for about 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And they remade the original TV series, of course, from the 90s, the late 80s and 90s. And I was a bit skeptical, because it was one of those things that I loved when I was a kid. I loved the original MacGyver with...
Will it hold up?
Yeah, Richard Dean Anderson was it. And this one totally holds up. And there's a lot of watches in the TV series that pay pivotal moments, but not all of them. There's in the second series, there's MacGyver gets his father's watch, and it looks very reminiscent of those divers from the 70s, but it's not branded. But I think his main watch in it was more of a character in the first series, I would say, was like a Timex Weekender, I think, or a Timex kind of military one. But as the seasons have gone on, there's a lot of watches in it, but you can't necessarily tell them what they are, which I thought was a weird choice, whether they didn't want to tie themselves to a specific brand or they didn't have a brand deal. But you could have easily wedged in a watch brand in there, because there's certain scenes where the watches become a pivotal part of the
for the explosions.
Yes.
For all the explosions. I wonder if it was MacGyver, But there was a show that my wife was watching, and she paused it, and she knows now when she's like, it was full screen, like a full screen, like watch shot where the antagonist was like looking at, like, what time is it, and it was a unbranded, it was clearly made to look like a JLC or a Cartier tank. It's clearly made to look like a Cartier tank, but didn't have any, and they made up, so I can't remember the name of the brand, but like it was some made up brand that, where they took the effort to make a completely random branded watch so that they, wouldn't have to call up Cartier. And
yeah, it's funny because I mean, MacGyver even goes to the point of where the mechanics of the watch that his dad's missing in the first season, presumed dead or whatever, and he takes apart the watch. There's a significant scene where he's actually in the mechanical movement of the watch, but still there's no branding of the watch.
Right.
But anyway, okay, well that was some fun watch spotting, and you'll have to let us know on the Facebook group if you've spotted any interesting watches. There's an IMDb, isn't there, of watches I quite like, but also, like you said, some of the watch forums are quite good at picking out the watches.
I'll make sure to post that one, that link for Watch You Seek, and their forums are really good for that, on the Facebook channel.
Yeah. So first news stories, as I said, it's a bit of a light news week. There's been some interesting ones around. Breitling increased its watch sales, its online watch sales, and it looks like the watch market is kind of coming back around now. But I probably need to do a bit more research on the actual facts and figures. Maybe I'll do that for next week, of whether this is a recovery, whether it was just boredom of people at home buying watches online and that offset retail sales, which you would expect it to do.
I also hear a lot of companies that are saying, we're doing better than forecasted, and so that you could say, well, okay, was that forecast made post COVID? Because that forecast was zero in some situations, in some industries. It was like, yeah, we're going to make no money, and so like better than forecasted. We did 114% better than forecasted. We're like, well, yeah, but what does that look like? Pre-COVID.
Yeah, and it's funny as well. I don't know if you cottoned on to the new Apple Watch, but it's got one of those, I've forgotten the name of the sensor, but essentially it senses oxygen in the blood, which apparently was a sign of suffering from COVID because it was a respiratory disease. So people are saying, oh, now the new Apple Watch can test whether you've got COVID or not.
Oh, jeez.
It would probably report you, wouldn't it, automatically?
Right. But, and I'm sure Apple's like, the opening is like, you have to click a thing that says, we do not test for this.
Yeah, it's funny. So I think the two ones that stood out for me was, I don't know why I like the look of this, but Casio released an edifice in relation to the F1 team, the Alpha Tauri, is it? It looks pretty cool. It's got a kind of I've never seen this before, but it's a grey to white faded dial. So not like a sunburst, it's at the top's like a grey and it fades to a white. It looks pretty cool. Normally these edifices don't really float my boat anymore, but this one I quite like the look of it.
Yeah, it's sharp with the blue, kind of the gray blue colors that they've chosen. And the dial, I think it certainly can suffer. The edifice line certainly suffers from the amount of text and stuff on the dial. Some of them are okay, and then some are just like, first of all, I can't tell what time it is, let alone what altitude and direction we're at.
Yeah, I'm sure the technology's got a lot better. I got the first ever edifice watch that had the Bluetooth capability. It worked some of the time, but it certainly wasn't perfected, and that was 5 or 6 years ago, so I imagine the technology is a lot better now.
Speaking of F1, one of the teams is changing for 2021. Renault is becoming Alpine. So if you remember that little blue car, that little blue sports car, little Alpine, they did rally it actually too. That's why I'm kind of caught my attention. So they are switching the team over to that brand, and basically sort of stepping back as the engine manufacturer for F1 so that they can get they can sort of focus on what they do, providing engines for F1, and not have to be held to coming in the top 3 or the top 5 or whatever. So it's an interesting marketing, but it made me think of whether Bell and Ross is going to go to Alpine.
Because I've used this car in some of my uploads, because there's a classic car show, which obviously stopped now for COVID, but there was a classic car show, and there was a guy that had a beautiful version of that car, and he had the Hoyer stopwatches in there as well. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he knew that these were several $1,000 stopwatches, but they were mounted into the dash to meet how the rally cars.
Yeah, how the rally cars were done. Yeah, the A110 is their new the mid-engine rear-wheel drive sports car. It was they brought it back. They've been selling it for a little while, and so it's an interesting choice in a kind of a couple reasons, because it's not like a Toyota or a major manufacturer that's getting involved here. It's sort of this one-off sports car brand that is being built by another company, kind of almost like Alfa Romeo, where they're certainly bigger, but it's that's a giant conglomeration.
Yeah,
lots of crossover here between the Swatch Group that owns 15 brands. There's the Fiat Group that owns 15 brands. So speaking of racing, so they had the 24 Hours of Le Mans this weekend, and not in June. It kind of caught me off guard because I had heard that it was postponed, and then they're racing it. So I watched it this weekend. First off, I was sad that no spectators. I mean, that is usually a festival. And so there's nobody in the stands. There's just the cars on course. And then a typical, for us watch spotting. One thing that I just wanted to mention was Richard Mille had an all-female driving team at the race, car number 50.
Oh, interesting.
And so they had and this is a team they're branding. So I mean, it isn't like a sub brand. This is the Richard Mille race team.
What car were they in? What were they, Mercedes or something?
So it's a P2 LMP2 prototype.
Oh wow.
So I don't know currently what engine it runs, but it's one of the prototype cars that the team set up, and they did really well. So they came in ninth overall. So
that's impressive. So the driving and the pit crew and everything.
Well, the 3 drivers
were
all female. So 3, So in Le Mans 24-hour, you have a minimum time that you have to drive. So you have 3 drivers, and they have a minimum time that they have to be in the car turning laps. And as long as that's met, you can do any combination of, you could have one person run for, 8 hours or something, and then switch them. Usually it's a it's a very strategic switch where you put the person that's super experienced in the race car in the beginning when everything is crazy and there's 60 cars on track and they have to keep it neat. And then you put the young guy or young female, young woman who can see at night and is not going to have a problem with the sun coming up. Because those hours are scary where you're just in dusk and it's hard to see, and your eyes have to be, you need 20-year-old eyes for that. And then the driver that would be appropriate for the final laps, that sort of thing. And then, maybe move through it a couple times. But interesting stuff from the racing world this week.
That's cool. Well, then one more story before we pause for an ad break and then get into our section on modding is, I talked about this last week, Bamford, who are the famous watch modders, and they also have their own brand of watches. They released a limited edition G-Shock. It looks cool. It's sold out in minutes. There's clowns putting... it was $150, and there's already several on eBay for $700. So I emailed them, because it said inquire now, and I just said, Are these coming out again? Is this going to be a regular thing? And they said, oh, no, you can only get it from Beaverbrooks in the UK now. So it's a real sneaky thing. And this, I need to do a proper research on this limited edition stuff and maybe make it into a YouTube video, because I think it's getting outrageous now. I mean, a G-Shock of all things, that it looks awesome. I mean, if they've done this, I think we talked about it last week, where it looks almost as if it's like the Matrix, where some of the characters look partially burnt in. There's some ghosting there. I mean, if they've got that sort of Nixie tube type look to it, it's going to be incredible. I just do not understand why it has to be limited edition. It's a G-Shock. They could have probably sold 2 or 3 times as many. If they sold out in 3 minutes, they've not made enough.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We've spoken. It's past time for watch companies to not recognize the eBay scalping market that will always happen. And I mean, I understand that it's happening. I mean, we had a couple of guys on the Facebook group that were talking about they wanted to get the latest from a micro brand, and was sold out in 4 minutes. And it was kind of like, well, what do we do? And you're like, well, maybe you could connect via a different internet connection, like your phone instead of your Wi-Fi, this sort of thing. Oh, and also scalpers used robots and bought all those watches so that they could flip them to sell them on eBay for $200 more. Like that's, like that is the market. So we need manufacturers, we need micro brands, we need people to just acknowledge that this exists and this is going to happen. And just they could just put a stop to it. It's
going to sour the watch collecting community. I feel like it's going to eventually get to the point where you can already see a slight backlash online on these some of the Hodinkee stuff. I mean that Hodinkee travel clock is almost become a meme now. I've heard several YouTubers link it into like comical parts of their videos where they talk about it. That Hodinkee travel clock, I think, has become a meme that will haunt them for a very, very long time.
Oh yeah.
Because it was almost it was the most obtuse, obscene limited edition thing that's come out, I think.
Yeah. It definitely embodies, like, you think of like all of the stuff they had, like maybe kind of crazy stuff they had leading up to that, and then they went and like just over the top, and so you're just like, it's it over the top, the whole meme.
Absolutely. So that was So hopefully I'll keep an eye on this Bamford one. But anyway, okay. So before we dive into our main story, let's just pause for a very quick ad break.
Hey, it's Chris from the Casual Watch Talk podcast. As our longtime listeners know, we often talk about cars here on the pod, and that's no coincidence. Like a lot of mechanical watch lovers, we're both into cars and racing. A couple years ago, I curated a collection of automotive-inspired straps and started the Campionato Club. Campionato Club watch straps celebrate the rich history of automotive liveries with their inspired colors. Available in a single-pass NATO, 2-piece, and our new super comfy elastic NATO. Check out Campionato Club on the web. That's championship in Italian, CAMPIONATO.club.
Leading up to that, and then they went and like just over the top, and so you're just like, it's it over the top, the whole meme.
Absolutely. So that was So hopefully I'll keep an eye on this Bamford one. But anyway, okay. So before we dive into our main story, let's just pause for a very quick ad break. Hey everyone, welcome back to Casual Watch Talk. So for our main topic now, we're going to do an introduction to watch modding. I am not a watch modder, but Chris is, so hopefully I can ask questions that I think are on your mind if you're thinking about modding a watch. Now, if you like this series, then we can cover it again on the podcast, or maybe we can do a sort of a mini series over on the YouTube channel. But Chris, let's start with what I'm interested in, how you got into watch modding, because there's this kind of bravery factor, isn't there, where you're like, I'm taking a watch that, because even an SKX is what, at the time that you bought it, I mean, they've gone crazy now, but at the time you got it was like 200 or something.
Yeah, my Seiko Turtle was how I started, and $300 investment on bracelet, and you're like, okay. And at the time, I mean, I think my most
expensive watch. I had a Hamilton khaki that was, were in the retail like $500-$600. So it started with, I obviously saw that this was a possibility, that like I see this on YouTube and we're talking about it. So okay, the folks and Instagram as well. I mean, some of the watch modders over on Instagram, I mean, just the stuff that they do that they can do was super fascinating to me and looks super cool. So to have that unique piece where, it just has the one that I was certainly fascinated in the same, it tickled the same vein, fancy that is car modification,
Yes.
like, oh, I can put a bigger turbo in it, or I can have this modification, I can flash the ECU or, something like that. So in that same sort of way, like, oh, I could make this unique, be whatever I wanted it to be. And so I started out and I watched, there's a couple of channels on YouTube certainly covering this, and there were a couple of sort of specific modding channels that I think are still around, but kind of had come and gone. This is maybe 2.5, 3 years ago.
Yeah, they run out of content, don't they? I think once they've covered all the main bases, that it's hard to. I know certainly there was a few that I watched as well. And just before we dive into this, before you open your watch, by the way, you're just going to immediately void your warranty on any of this stuff. So
Right,
go into it with open eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Warranty gone. Yeah. So there's one that stuck around that does professional watch repair, called the Watch Repair Channel, and great guy over there, and his videos are enjoyable to watch, super close-up macro shots of stuff. And when he's using some of these techniques, getting the hands off, taking movement out, to like what level of it's sort of, you see, okay, you sort of like get an idea like, oh, maybe this is possible.
Yeah.
Maybe I could pull this off. And then it became a financial decision for me, because I said, okay, well, I'm not going to get into all this like crazy watch modding stuff, and I'm not going to buy all the tools and maybe not, learn this new technique, this new skill. So I ordered a set of hands off of eBay with the Lollipop second hand for the Seiko Turtle. It's the 6250, the original Turtle, I think, something like that. But it had, the original Turtle had the Lollipop seconds instead of the white hand with the Lollipop on the back side. So I was interested in changing out the hands. And then the stuff that I had no problem, and this is something I would suggest that you start with, is the bezel and the bezel insert is a good place to start. That's it's a little more forgiving than any of the tiny little watch parts, where you're popping a bezel off, where you've got to sort of protect the surface of the watch, and use a tool to get in there, a knife to get in there to pop the bezel off. Their friction fit on there. So I changed over to a ceramic 12-hour bezel insert, and I just wanted these hands installed. So I went to a local watch shop, and they quoted me, I think, $180.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, now that I've done all this, of course, to have a master watchmaker take the time with my little Seiko mod and pop some hands on, that price is probably reasonable.
Yeah, it's risk versus reward for them, isn't it? Because if they mess it up.
Yeah, they mess it up, and also, just like guys that modify cars, the dealership doesn't want to deal with us. Because we come in and we're like, and they're like, oh, we have a problem with the transmission, da 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 da, and the dealership's like, well, yeah, well, you change the ECU and you change the turbo and you change, and they just, and then it becomes this, and we get this reputation. So it's that same sort of thing. So I understand, but at the same time, I was like, 180. Went to another place, sort of similar, got a similar quote, 150, something like that, to do it. And I said, okay. I've looked at this watch repair channel. I've looked at these watch monitor channels on YouTube. What is it? What does a set of tools take to just starting out? To just, because if you're mechanically inclined, and maybe I can pull this off. You can pick up a set of tools to do this, a decent set of tools to do some basic watch modifications for about $100 to $200. Right in that budget. If you have a $200 budget, you will have everything you need to get started. And we'll kind of talk about some of the tools that you should start with.
Yep.
But I got right. I said, why not? Why not? We'll order some tiny little screwdrivers and the different parts you need. So, watch holder, movement holder, the particular tools that take off the hands. And over at the watch repair channel, they use a technique to take off the hands where they use a piece of plastic. And, everybody's got a Ziploc bag, little tiny Ziploc bags. So you just cut it and you just lay a piece of plastic over and then use whatever tool that you would have to pull those hands off. But it really protects the dial.
It's amazing how effective that is. I've done that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think one of the first tools that is highly recommended that I think gets not mentioned enough is actual Rodico, the sticky green, it's like sticky tack is what my wife called it the first time she saw it. So it's very similar.
Yeah, it looks like blue tack in the UK.
Yeah, blue tack, exactly. I went out and I bought the actual Bergeron. Bergeron is a Swiss watch tool manufacturer, and bought an actual block of this stuff. Was pretty fairly expensive. But as far as manipulating stuff without leaving any sort of debris or oils from your hands, and you've got finger cots on, but actually using it as a tool is I find that I go to that. If I need to pick up hands and stuff, I can't necessarily do it with tweezers. But you grab that sticky tack, Rodico, pick it up, put the hand where you need to be, and being able to manipulate it, and then it doesn't leave any residue, and that sort of stuff. And you can actually clean any sort of a lot of the residue and stuff off of the dial with that. So you'd be cleaning the dial off, cleaning the hands off, etc. But I digress. On receiving all of these tools, I also bought an old beat up 7009 Seiko on eBay that was for parts and repair. That was just in whatever shape it was in. I think I paid $40 for it. The 7009 movement is a predecessor of the 7S26, so very similar. The winding mechanism works pretty similar, and the way the date complication is fairly similar. And practiced taking that apart and pulling that out and pulling off the little pieces, and that's definitely what kicked it off, to see if I could actually do it.
So Bergeron, it's interesting you just mentioned Bergeron there. That is the gold standard, isn't it? If you were going all out and you wanted what the actual Swiss watchmakers use, then Bergeron's it's I don't know what car parts you'd have in comparison, but they are the gold standard of watch.
Right. It's like getting it's like getting an OEM part. So in your watch, in your movement manuals online, where you'll download a PDF of an ETA movement they'll specify Bergeron oils and tools in the manual. So it's you're absolutely right. It's like buying OEM stuff. You don't have to start with that, and I find much like most tools, you can get by with the $100 worth of the watchmaking kit, the starter kit on Amazon. That'll certainly get you started, but realize that the real thing in a lot of cases is so much better. I went on to actually buy a real set of Bergeron screwdrivers, and they are so much better. Yeah, that was twice the price of all the tools up until then. So, but like I think the like $230 set. But I felt I'd progressed to a point where, okay, I enjoy this. I can do this. The second biggest thing is magnification and optics. So like being able to see what you're working on and getting used to manipulating parts and pieces at that level and practicing with a beat up movement, or, like I said, I picked up like a $50, something on eBay, or like a used movement or whatever. And even a brand new movement is fairly inexpensive now, $30-$40 that you could try. One of the issues that I had, I'm left eye dominant, even though I'm right-handed. And so I had to like figure out like what was going to work best for me. There are the guys that use the stereo vision. So it's like basically like your dentist, would have two eyeglasses, or like a pair of magnifiers on both eyes, and you sort of see it in stereo. I absolutely can't do that. It's too difficult for me to like spatially find where the thing is. And my eyes get all crossed up. So figuring out sort of how you're going to work with in magnification, getting a good set that, maybe clips onto, I have one that clips onto my, like a set of reader glasses. That's pretty good. And then getting in and getting used to handling parts and pieces. So it's funny when you're looking through a 10x loop at, like, let's say the mainspring of a watch movement, that is like looking at a 15-inch pizza. Like, that's how big that makes it. And so after sitting at a workbench and kind of looking at these parts and pieces, they look huge to you, but then you look up and you take a breath, take off your glasses, and you realize that this thing is smaller than your fingernail.
Yeah, that's why it's quite one of the things that I wasn't expecting to be quite so hard, or at least I in my mind I didn't think it was quite hard, but you really showed me over a course of many weeks was how precise the regulation on the watches are, especially on the Japanese movements where they struggle to hold regulation in certain positions. And
so much stuff then goes into that. And once, so I feel like your first step is, the intro to watch modding is, if you switch out a movement, you should be, that's something that's pretty, pretty easy to handle as far as maybe your first big project. It's going to require you to cut a stem for a crown. So you'll need the tools to do that, and then Loctite that back on and sort of figure out the spacing. Tons of YouTube videos on how to do that. Hand removal. So just any time that you need to get into a watch movement, it's going to require you to take the hands off to remove the dial to get into the movement, especially the calendar side. Sort of, I'd say, start there. That's sort of like your first practice is to get in there. And then once you start even talking about like all of the gears, the gear train and the mainspring and the movements, and if you start actually digging into the pieces and parts there, so many little things go into like how clean it is. It has to be unbelievably spotless. So I mean, I have a little like a HEPA filter in my office that just circulates and removes the fine small dust. It helps me immensely, because then I take something apart and then it's not immediately covered with dust. Again, once you get a 10x loop on, you're gonna be like, whoa, where did all this come from? So that helps to keep the dust down. But lubrication of all the parts, so that manual that I was talking about, whether it's ETA or Seiko or Miyota, they'll have exactly how much oil that needs to go on each individual part in each individual jewel, and the gear train and the pallet and the mainspring, etc. And so if any of that is not quite right, it can completely throw off the speed, the timekeeping of a watch. And I certainly realize that is like, it's one of those things where it's like you get started with something where it takes you like, minutes to learn, lifetime to master. Very easy to disassemble and put back, put a watch movement back together, take it apart, put it back together. I used to do laptop repair like 15, 20 years ago. And so like taking apart, tiny little screws, motherboards, tiny little computer parts, that would like kind of snap together. This all makes sense to me. But with watches and a watch movement, learning all the tricks and learning all the skills necessary to put it back together so that it keeps perfect time, that's a lifetime to master.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. Before we finish up, I'd like to know, how many watches do you think you've modded now? And are there certain brands that you feel like lend themselves, or certain movements that you think would be the place to start if you were wanting to change the hands or whatever?
I think I probably, if I were to say, I probably have modded and sold about 10. I've modded many more, several of my own personal watches, lots more that I modified and then went back and modified again, and are now still just an empty case in the watch box and maybe waiting for some inspiration. So certainly had lots of fun. The one that I had the most fun with was I did a sort of an homage space watch, which I called the Space Turtle, and I'll make sure to post a picture up in the Facebook group. And Crystal Times is a company that you'll definitely hear when you start to do watch modifications. They have cases and crystals and parts and pieces, and they came out with a blue anodized turtle case. And the way they had it with a 12-hour sort of countdown bezel insert, I immediately was inspired to do a Seiko Turtle watch if it was for the space shuttle astronauts. So this didn't happen, but sort of like took that as an inspiration to say like, all right, well, what if Seiko had produced a mechanical Seiko Turtle for the space shuttle? And so that's kind of been my best, because it was I was very inspired to do it. And then the stuff that I picked, the pieces and parts that I put together. It's also helpful if you have a visual background, if you can mock it up, because there's tons of pictures of this stuff. If you can mock it up in like a visual program on your computer beforehand, like Photoshop or something, where you can sort of say like, okay, what's this going to look like with these hands on it, with this dial? It really helps to have an idea of what it's going to look like at the end when you're doing stuff like this. But I started with Seiko. I definitely still say that's where the biggest mod scene is, so to speak. So anything SKX, there's now 3 or 4 companies that make SKX cases that you can buy for less than, back in the day, 2 years ago, I would find an SKX on sale for like $180.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too bad because you got a movement you could mess with, you get the hands, you get the case and the bracelet and et cetera, et cetera. So it wasn't too bad, but you're certainly not like this is going to be a hobby. You're certainly not going to make money doing this because, the part, we've already talked about the tools necessary, but then like the parts pieces.
And the good thing with they mentioned with Seiko movements is that pretty much any modern Seiko movement, including the TMI ones, they all take the same handset, don't they?
Right, exactly. So then you can just, you have, once you get into that SKX world, there's a couple movements that will just drop into any watch. The most complicated thing you have to worry about is a 3 o'clock dial versus a 4 o'clock dial, where the crown is at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Because that will change how the calendar is. So like so if you take a calendar out of a 3 o'clock crown watch and you try to put it in a 4 o'clock crown watch, it doesn't, because you're shifting the dial, 40 degrees or whatever. The wheels don't line up. But that's, I'd say maybe that's one of the only gotchas. Search on eBay for SKX hands. Like I said, tons of mod sites out there, that make cases and crystals and sort of whatever your imagination can go for. And especially if you start with an SKX compatible, you get the benefit of the most amount of dials that you can find, the most amount of bezel inserts, the most amount, and even there are some companies that are making, and like the Space Turtle, that case was a turtle case, so it was that same style, but it was sized to take SKX parts.
Yeah.
So it really takes advantage of the fact that, like, okay, so now you have the case that you want, but then you can you got this cool SKX bezel you can put on there, and and etc. So definitely the place to start. I have progressed through it to the point where I'm now looking into some of these more advanced classes, like you mentioned with the Walbrook will be a very advanced setup, because we figured out that the movement is a similar size, and to give that watch hacking, so do a movement swap on basically a lesser known, that's the mod scene over in the Miyota movements is not as big. And once you get into ETA movements, now you're talking, it's no longer a movement that you can pick up on eBay for $40. We're talking, I've seen them in the 200, an ETA, a basic 3-hand ETA is going to be in a $200. So you better have the experience of taking apart and putting back together 1,000 SKXs before you dig into an ETA movement. But it's been enjoyable, and I hope those couple of tips, like I said, basic toolkit, something on Amazon that you can certainly pick up for $110, $150, and then get in there and practice, and have fun with it, enjoy it.
Oh, awesome! Thanks so much for that, Kris. And let us know over on the Facebook group if you want to hear anything specific, and maybe we can cover it on another topic, or make a little video series on the YouTube channel. I think that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Okay, guys, as always, we really appreciate you listening, and we'll see you all next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks, guys. Bye.